Today I'm going to cut two last pieces of foam and then I'm going to start gluing the bottom of the hull section together. So let's get started. When I made the cuts last time with the jigsaw, they were somewhat straight, but they could have been straighter. So today I'm going to attempt to use the yardstick here as a guide for the jigsaw. So this is supposed to be a 30-inch cut, but the jigsaw has a 4-inch from the side of the plate to the blade, which works out to about 1 9/16 inches. So I'm going to measure this off at 31 9/16 inches. All right, so this measures out at 30 inches, so should be good. It's actually, unfortunately, it's just a hair shy, but I think that's going to be okay because this board is actually going to be cut down a little anyways. Unfortunately, that's as far as I can reach, so I'm going to have to move this whole thing over. Although in theory I could also cut this way because I don't actually need the whole width, but I'm not quite sure what width I'm going to need, so I kind of want to cut the whole thing off and then be able to trim it to the right thing later. So this would obviously be a great job for, say, like a panel saw where I could do a whole panel in one big smooth cut. All right, so you can see here where the two parts met. You can see here, it's a little bit out of focus, but you can see here where the two parts met. And you can see a few places where the blade stopped, but this isn't too bad. Now, this is actually especially not too bad because I'm going to probably be trimming this edge more anyways. And I have two factory edges here that are straight. So when I join pieces together, I'm going to glue on the factory edges. All right, round two. There seems to be a problem with the tool, so I'm going to have to stop this and figure out what went wrong. Don't know what was wrong, but I took the blade out, put it back in. It works again. I don't know if it was temporarily overheated or what, but it seems to be good now. All right, this cut is complete. This edge here is not as clean because of the wandering when the ruler slipped. But as I mentioned, I'm going to be using the nice factory edges for gluing it together. And then after it's glued together, I think it needs to be trimmed down to size, so it should be okay. The next thing I need to do is glue the 4 panels together to make one big giant panel. So it's going to go from here, then all the way back. And you'll see where I have that foam piece standing up. That's the end of the boat. The stuff behind that is going to be trimmed off, but I'm not exactly quite sure where that's going to be until I put on the side pieces. So next I'm going to glue the foam pieces together. I'm going to be using Gorilla Glue for that. This is a lot different than the typical like Elmer's glue that you might use on wood. It actually needs water sprayed on it to be activated. It also lets off some not so great fumes. It's an expanding polyurethane foam, so it'll actually fill in some of the gaps. And here's a little sample piece that I've glued together. You can see it's a very strong bond. Yeah, so this is not coming apart. Ugh, okay, so there we go. So I got it. You can see some of it did come apart at the seam. Some of it just broke off. I've poked little holes in here to give it a stronger mechanical bond, and I'll do the same thing there. So this is going to be pretty good to hold the pieces together until we get the fiberglass stuff on, or the poor man's fiberglass as it is. The Gorilla Glue instructions say that I should clamp my pieces together, but I'm not really sure how I would clamp together two pieces of foam like this. So instead we're going to use my old friend the gaffer's tape. I've applied gaffer's tape on this side, and then once I glue it together, I'll apply gaffer's tape on this side as well to keep it all held together. So that's also going to have the added benefit that the tape will prevent the glue from squishing out. So the Gorilla Glue actually expands a little bit as it cures. And so that's going to be good for getting into all the bumps and cracks and stuff in here. And it's going to work even better if it's not squishing out the sides. So this side here is already pretty rough with lots of holes. Actually, both these are except here. So I'm going to roll this just a little. But it doesn't really need much because it's already a pretty rough surface. So I'm going to spread glue on both surfaces and then use this squirt bottle here to wet the foam or wet the glue, and then I'll fold it together and quickly put tape on it. It needs to be clamped for a few hours, I think. So I don't know if I'll have time to do both pieces today, but that'll actually be good. I'll be able to put this together, see how it works out, then do the big piece and then attach them all together. So I got to put on the back of the box says that it's got nasty foams, so I'm going to put on a organic cartridge respirator just in case, since I have absolutely no ventilation in here. I successfully glued the panels together, but there's a big problem. I used more water and more Gorilla Glue when I put this piece together than I did on my test piece. And as you can see, that was not a good idea. The glue came bursting out through the seams. Let's take the tape off and see just how bad the damage is. So the good news is, I think that the tape did manage to hold the two pieces together so that there's not a large gap between them. But I definitely have to get rid of all of this stuff that's sitting on top of it. I'm not quite sure what the best tool to do that is. I'm going to start with the simple X-Acto knife. I'm going to say not the X-Acto knife. This foam here is pretty hard to cut, and I'm going to have to get it pretty smooth so that I can eventually do the fiberglass over it. So I'm going to move on to power tools. I have a Dremel here with a plastic cutting bit on it. I'm going to see if that works any better. All right, so this seems to be doing an okay job. It's definitely going to take a little bit of time to get it down level without cutting too much into the green foam. So I'll be back in a bit. So I've successfully removed most of the Gorilla Glue foam with the Dremel. I did cut into the foam a few places here. To get the rest of this off, I'm just going to use some pretty coarse grit sandpaper. This is going to tear up the surface a bit, but for the next step, which is gluing the canvas on, I was going to do this anyway, so it's kind of not a big deal that it's going to tear it up because it's just saving me time for the next step. To reduce the amount of dust that's produced, I'm using my vacuum as a very primitive dust collector. So if we look at this spot right here, it's relatively flat now. You can also see, at least I can see, that the seam in fact is pretty thin here. So that's all good. So despite putting in too much glue, I'm pretty happy with how this came out once it's all cleaned up. So I'm gonna finish sanding this down and then we'll be back for the next step. The next step is to glue the bow section together. I'm going to do pretty much the same thing I did on the stern section, except this time I'm going to use way less Gorilla Glue. All right, so this has to cure for a couple hours and then I'll be able to move it. And then about another 24 hours before it's really set solid, I believe. Using less Gorilla Glue was definitely a good idea. There's far less bulging out. I'm still gonna have to clean it up a little bit, but it's definitely better than before. Let's take off the tape and see how bad it is. This is not too bad at all. We got a little sticking out here. Unfortunately, over here, looks like it didn't penetrate all the way, which is unfortunate. I think it's gonna be okay. Maybe I'll put some filler in there just to ensure that it really is all sealed up. But I think it's pretty good. I might even be able to get away with really this is the only offensive part. I might be able to get away with just sanding it. All right, that cleaned up pretty nice. I'm gonna vacuum this, flip it over, and see the other side. This side's even better than the other side. I'm pretty sure that this is the side that was face down on the floor. So I think that because of the extra pressure there, it pushed the foam to go out the other side because it was the easier way to escape. So just a little bit of sandpaper. I've prepared both surfaces and I've put the tape on the back, so now it's just time to glue them together. That's all for today. Next time, I think I'm going to get to finally bend the bottom of the hull into shape. That's a really big unknown. I don't know if that's going to work, so we'll see. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to like and subscribe.